Hi ma'am, for today's video, I'm gonna report about the global economic flows, which is the continuation of Juscuro Alarde's report. Global economic flows. Outsourcing. Outsourcing is a transfer of activities once performed by an entity to a business or businesses in exchange for money. It is a complex phenomenon that is not restricted to the economy, not only a macro level phenomenon, and that simply global in character. Dealing with the first issue while outsourcing in the economic realm is of greatest importance and the issue of concern here. It also occurs in many other institutions such as healthcare and the military. In terms of healthcare, one example is the work of the radiologists, which is increasingly being outsourced. This is made possible because the material with which radiologists deals, like X-rays, is now usually digitalized and therefore sent easily and quickly via the internet to radiologists anywhere in the world. Second is we need to go beyond the macro level of outsourcing. To deal with it, it is a meso and micro level. Thus, we can include under the heading of outsourcing at the meso level restaurants and that outsource the cooking of their food to outside organizations, and the micro level parents who outsource the care of their young children or aged parents to institutions, especially daycare and assisted living centers. Inclusion of these levels makes for a more satisfying and more complete sense of outsourcing. Although much of it may be not related directly to globalization, nonetheless globalization is often involved even at these levels is exemplified by the fact that the micro level of care for children or aged parents in developing countries is often outsourced to immigrants, legal or illegal, from less developed countries. Offshore outsourcing. Offshore outsourcing is the transfer of activities to entities in other countries. The form of outsourcing most closely and importantly associated with globalization is offshore outsourcing, which involves sending work to companies in other countries. For example, a variety of Indian firms have become very important setting for the outsourcing of various kinds of work, the best known of which is performed by call centers. However, as we saw above in the case of healthcare and military, offshore outsourcing is not restricted to the economy and is therefore globalizing is a far broader sense than is usually understood. For example, the offshore outsourcing of war has a long history, including British outsourcing of fighting much of the Revolutionary War to paid mercenaries, especially the Haitians. But it boomed, at least in the case of the US, following the end of the Cold War. Insourcing involves the fact that offshore outsourcing necessarily involves tasks being taken by the firms in other countries. In the case of the US and other development countries, the work that is outsourced to say is India is simultaneously being a great deal of work, and the US and Great Britain, among others, are also insourcing some work that had been performed in the other countries. Next is financial globalization. Financial globalization. The world economies have become more tightly interconnected as a result of globalization. One reflection of that is the well-known phrase, "Well, the American economy sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold." However, dramatic economic events in other parts of the world also have an impact of the financial crisis that struck Asia and Russia in 1990s. However, it remains the case that the more powerful the economy, the greater the effect of its crisis on the rest of the world. The corollary is that problems in weaker economies have less of an effect across the globe. Thus, Argentina had a serious financial crisis in the late 1990s and early 2000, but impact in the global economy was comparatively small. Great Recession. Thus, when the US suffers a financial crisis, it does not have a profound effect on the rest of the world's economies. This was demonstrated most recently in subprime mortgage crisis associated with the Great Recession of 2008 to 2009, which had its root in problems associated with a dramatic increase in the issuing of highly risky subprime mortgages by American banks. These were mortgages sold primarily to relatively low-income people whose ability to repay these loans was not checked closely in order to allow and to induce them to buy homes. They were offered low interest rates, rates below the prime interest rate, or the possibility of paying only on the principal with no interest payments. But those highly attractive terms lasted for only a few years. And after that, the interest rates were to float, rising to the higher rate prevalent at the time. This served to raise hometown monthly payments, sometimes substantially. Many of those who bought homes at the subprime rate did not realize that such an increase would occur or how much more they would need to pay each month. They also believed that they would be able to refinance their homes at an attractive fixed interest rate when the initial low interest rate ended. But they found that the emergency crisis had left banks unable or unwilling to offer them new credit at low rates. The crisis has begun in earnest, with large numbers of comparatively low-income homeowners were unable to make their monthly payments and the banks foreclosed on their homes. Sovereign wealth funds. Funds control led by nation states that often invest in other countries. The biggest concern about foreign controls involves financial investment in the US by sovereign wealth funds, which amounted to over $21 billion in 2007. These funds are owned by nation states, not corporations or individual investors, and when they invest in other countries, it is in fact those nation states that are doing the investing. Among largest sovereign wealth funds are the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, the government of Singapore Investment Corporation, and the China Investment Corporation. In a sense, the activities of these funds involves a new form of state capitalism. Next is consumption. While aspects of globalization that relates to consumption has been mentioned above, especially in the discussion of global value chains, in this section we focus more directly on consumption itself in a global context. Hyperconsumption. Hyperconsumption, buying more than one can afford. Hyperdebt is owing more than one will be able to repay. Consumption also plays itself out differently in different parts of the world. For example, both the US and Japan can be seen as consumer societies, but Japan differs from the US in many ways, including the fact that it has never fully embraced the idea of consumer society. The more specifically, continues to manage to save a significant amount, in contrast to the US where the saving rate approaches zero. Consumers, objects, and services. Much of consumption revolves around shopping for and purchasing objects of all kinds. Quarter pounders, snowboards, automobiles, and etc. But in recent years, an increasing amount of consumption relates to various services, legal, accounting, educational, and etc. Of particular importance in terms of objects and services is the issue of brands and brandings. Brands are of great importance both within a nation as well as globally. Indeed, much money and effort is invested in creating brand names that are recognized and trusted throughout the world. Consumers is increasing numbers of people throughout the world are spending more and more time as consumers. Not long ago, it was very different as most people spend most of their time as producers. Not only do more people spend more time consuming, but they are increasingly more likely to define themselves by what they consume than by their roles as producers and workers. Furthermore, consumers are on the move throughout the world, often as tourists. Not only is tourism a form of consumption, but much tourism is undertaken in order to consume the goods and services on offer at other locales throughout the world. Consumption processes. This includes knowing how to work their way through a shopping mall, use a credit card, or make purchase online. Others have not yet encountered, let alone learn how to handle these processes, but many of them certainly will in the not too distant future. Where these processes are known, this is remarkable similarity throughout the world. In the process of consuming in a supermarket, a shopping mall, or a fast food restaurant. Consumption sites. American and Western style consumption sites, shopping malls, fast food restaurants, clothing chains, discounters such as Walmart, Disney like theme parks, Las Vegas style casino hotels, internet sites such as Amazon.com and eBay have spread throughout much of the world. Global resistance. The global spread of chain stores, theme parks, and so on has led to many concerns and to resistance in many parts of the world. One now even sees resistance, or at least increasing concern, in the US. While we discuss resistance to consumption sites here, there is far broader global opposition to all aspects of consumption, especially hyperconsumption. For example, in Paris, there is much concern about the Champs-Élysées, the most beautiful avenue on earth, and the way it is increasingly dominated by large outlets, open megastores associated with global chains such as McDonald's, Adidas, Gap, Benetton, Disney, Nike, Zara, Virgin, Cartier, Louis Vuitton, and Sephora, as well as a huge auto showrooms for Toyota, Renault, and Peugeot. A major reason is that bargaining rental costs on the Champs-Élysées increasingly mean that it is only the large chain that can afford them. As a result, local institutions such as clubs and movie theaters are disappearing from the Champs-Élysées. A study commissioned by the city of Paris concluded that the avenue progressively is losing its exceptional and symbolic character, thus its attractiveness. An alternative view, however, is that these changes represent a democratization of the Champs-Élysées. They offer an escape for the less affluent, especially multi-ethnic young people, some of whom have been expressing their general dissatisfaction with French life. The end.